Okay, so I'll try to make this brief. And just a few preparations and warm ups to prime different muscle groups into getting yourself into the mermaid pose, which is kind of just a variation on the one leg pigeon pose. And, it's just setting the foundation of getting your pigeon pose really nice and aligned and getting all the other muscle groups ready for that shape. And then once you get that, you can take different variations of your mermaid. The mermaid bind is sort of just that bind with the foot in the crook of your elbow and your arms overhead. And you can do that in a standing sort of dancer pose variation, or you can do it in a camel kneeling pose variation. And there's kind of just a whole slew of variations that you can do that are really fun. So it's just another way to have fun with your practice and make shapes with your body and advance your asana in different ways. And I'm doing this on the fly, and I'm kind of having a little flare-up neurological thing going on, so bear with me. So if you do have props available, a blanket especially, or you can use a couch cushion, are really helpful. That one is probably the most important one because that'll help prop you up in some of the pigeon variations, and it's a good pad to lay on. If you have blocks, they help, but you don't really need them. They're more to just have a place for your hands to land if you can't reach the floor, if you feel like you're slouching too much. So to start, I would say spread your blanket out just so you have a pad to lay on, and just get on your back. So we'll start with just bringing your knees in and just getting your lower back nice and comfortable, nice and warmed up. If you want to start just doing some little circles with your knees, whatever feels good, just play with it. And so with hip openers and a lot of sort of joint heavy postures, you'll find that one side is a lot easier than the other. So maybe start on the side that's a little more challenging, because a lot of times when we go through one side and then the other side, it's the first side that we spend a little more time on. So spend a little extra time on the side that you have a little more trouble with, so that'll give it a little warmth. And then set your feet down. And then you're just coming into a basic figure four. So you're crossing one ankle over your knee, and you're making a four, like the number 4 shape with your legs. And you can stay here and just practice flexing that foot and pushing the knee. You can even do it manually with your hand, or just actively press the knee away from your body. And then if you have space, you can lift that lower leg, and you can move any way that feels good. Sometimes rocking feels nice. Sometimes just staying in stillness and working on the breath is what you need. And there are different variations that you can play with in this. You can straighten the lower leg for a hamstring stretch. And if you feel like you have more space to pull that hip in, you can catch your hands around your shin. And that might be a little intense. And if you feel like you're curling in toward your knee, just take the back of the knee again. So let it be comfortable and active. And then maybe if you want to deepen again, maybe try to catch the shin So I'm starting on my more challenging side. So this one's catching my breath a little bit. So another good warm-up is if you scroll back into my videos, there's a hip opener class. So that's also a really good warm-up to prep for your pigeon pose into your mermaid. So if you haven't already, you can release that top leg and make some circles with your knees, and then bring your feet down. Just sway the hips from side to side. Release your hips. And then to the other side. So flex the foot, push the knee away, figure 4 stretch. So if you've done this the way I've suggested, this is going to be your more open side, your easier side, quote unquote. So maybe we won't have to spend as much time on that side. Just be aware of how it feels and how different it feels from the first side. So movement or stillness. Still actively pressing the foot, pressing through the heel, and then pressing the knee away from your shoulder and your upper body. And then finding variations if you want. Hamstring stretch, or catch behind the shin, or in front of the shin. And just notice how that feels. Connect into your breath. And then release. Set the feet down, windshield wiper the legs. So if you feel like you need more, you can pause and just do each side in that figure 4 again. You can always repeat postures if you feel like you need it, because postures and muscle stretching are progressive. So before you move on, if you want to stay here, feel free to do that. But then if you're ready to move on, come up and come to your knees. So coming into a hip flexor stretch. Here's where your blocks can really come in handy. So you set your hands underneath your shoulders at your blocks, and they can be at any height. And then you take, let's see, starting on any leg, take 1 foot forward. And if you have really tight hip flexors, your legs might be more in right angles. If you feel like you can come forward more, inch the toes forward so that your ankle comes forward of your knee. You want your hip bones square to the front, the top of your blanket or your mat, and then come into a deep hip flexor stretch, Anjaneyasana. So as you come forward, if you're tight in your hips, you're probably going to start to roll those hips toward that extended leg behind you. So taking that hip back automatically brings that opposite hip forward. Keeping the chest open, and here's where the blocks come into play. So you can really start to open your heart forward. And you're using your hands at the ground, almost like the blocks were anchored into the ground, and then you're pulling your hands back, almost like you're shifting into a higher gear. And keep pressing that front foot into the ground. So this will really anchor you. If you're just kind of flopping into place, you're not using any muscle control. So press the foot into the ground and then let the heart pull forward. And then you can lift the hips to release. You can even take a half split Ardha Hanumanasana just to release that hip flexor. Sometimes that's a good release. And if you wanted to even go a little bit deeper into that extended leg, you could walk the blocks all the way to the outside of that leg and get that deep stretch in your IT band, which goes from your hip to your knee. But you might even feel it behind your knee and all the way into your ankle, depending on how tight you are. You want a nice long spine. And then as you exhale, see if you can rotate your upper body, but keep squeezing into that leg. Press that foot all the way back down, come all the way back through center, and then take your hands to the inside of that front foot. You can toe heel your front foot out just a little bit wider so that your hands can come underneath your shoulders. So blocks or no blocks, depending on where you are, you're coming down into a lizard pose. So again, deep into the hip flexor, you're lowering down and hugging your knee into your chest. Let your heart open forward. So again, if you need blocks to raise the floor, your hands are underneath your shoulders. You're pulling your hands back isometrically and letting your heart open forward. You can tuck your elbows under a little bit more and see what happens to that stability. And then here, if you have space, so I made the mistake of going on my good side first. So maybe we'll spend some extra time on the other side. You can come down to your forearms as long as your knee doesn't splay out. And see what happens to your upper body. If you slouch and start to look at your knee, see if you can come forward. Press the elbows down and then isometrically pull them back toward your hip. And just feel what happens. Just big, full, deep breaths. If you find your breath pinching at all, pull back. You've gone a little bit too far to make the breath comfortable. So from here, release. You can bring your hands back to the floor or flat blocks. Toe heel the foot out 1.5 times, and then angle your foot to about a 45. Take the same hand on the side of the front leg and press down in the other hand. Lengthen through your spine. This is what happens when I don't use left and right, and I just leave it up to you. But as long as you can kind of mirror what I'm doing, you should be able to follow. So long through the spine, deep stretch in that hip flexor. It should feel pretty intense. Push that knee out just a little bit. Feel that opening in the outer hip joint. So here's where a little intensity comes in. Start to bend that back leg. Doesn't matter if you can't catch it yet. Just bend that back leg. And that's a good indication to see if your back leg has been angled out toward the outside or if it's nice in line. And I'll go into a little bit more detail with that later. And then release that. Come back through center. Shift the hips back. That hip flexor is going to feel pretty worked. And then release knees together. You can do whatever movements feel nice to release that. And then come back to standing on your knees. Right away to the other side. So you're coming back into that low lunge, Anjaneyasana. Blocks at the highest height. And you can lower as you get more comfortable and find depth in the posture. If you know you can come forward with the hips a little bit more, that deep hip flexor stretch, right in here, walk the toes forward so that your knee doesn't go over your ankle, so you have that nice stability. And then push the foot into the earth and pull that front hip back so that your 2 hip points aim toward the front. Let the heart come forward. So active through the stretch, and you can even kind of push and release, push and release, until you find that nice deep stretch that you can hold, but is also challenging enough that it might make your breath a little catchy. If your breath does start to catch, see if you can deepen it before you pull back a little bit. And then if you can't deepen it, if it's still catching, then pull back for sure. Heart reaches forward. Breath is deep. Spine is long. Foot is anchored into the earth. Just notice the difference between each side. If you can't tell which is your good side, then that's awesome. And then push into that front foot. Come into that half split, Ardha Hanumanasana. Squeeze the heel, pull the toes back, lift through the heart. Deep stretches. Spine stays long. Walk your hands all the way to the outside of that foot, to the leg. The leg shouldn't move at all as you lengthen through the spine, rotate, and then hinge forward, stretching deep into the IT band. Take 3 really controlled breaths and see if you can keep that action in all the muscles. Walk the hands all the way back. Press the foot down. Take the hands to the inside of that front foot. And then turn your blocks to the lowest. Walk the foot out just a little bit so that the hands can come underneath your shoulders. Glue your knee, the inside of your knee, to the outside of your arm. And then lower into that lizard lunge. Heart reaches forward. So you can lower your hands down to the floor if you find that you have space. And then if you want, you can take the blocks underneath your forearms. Just make sure that knee doesn't unglue itself from your shoulder. Keep it pulling in and let your eye gaze go forward. Just keep a nice long neck. So maybe gaze 6 or 8 inches ahead of your hands. And then moving your blocks away. Take your hands back underneath your shoulders, anchor down, and then toe heel that front foot out 1.5 times. That foot angles to about a 45 degree away from your face. And then the hand closest to that front leg catches the knee, anchor in the other hand, and then rotate. Long spine. if that feels good. Take that front hand and push the front knee out. And then here's that hinge. So your kneecap of that back leg should be pressing into the ground, which is also why a blanket is nice to protect kneecaps. And then just hinge. Hinge that back leg. So you're really digging deep into the muscle of the hamstring to curl that foot in. And then release. Hands touch down. Pull the hips all the way back. Send that front foot back. Find any movements that feel nice to release the hip. And at any time, you can pause and repeat any of that sequence if you feel like you need it more. Maybe take a little rest just to let the blood flow back into the muscles. Catch your breath if it's gone a little off. Okay, so fold your blanket at least one more time. So it's getting a little bit smaller and a little bit thicker. And then see if you can find a wall. So push the blanket right up against the wall. And take your blocks. And if you don't have blocks, maybe for this one, see if you can find something that can mimic blocks. A couple of books that you don't have much attachment to, or maybe find a human partner that can hold your hands to help you get down, or you could even use a chair. Just set up a chair in front of you, and then you can kind of lower yourself down. But I like blocks because you can use your hands independently. Okay, so you're coming to stand. So we're getting more stretch into the hip flexor, and then we're going all the way down into the quadriceps. So the whole front of the leg is what is going to be stretched in this sequence. So you take your blocks, and you find a wall, and it's really important that there's not a heater or something right at the wall. And then you press your foot, and then your whole shin goes down onto the wall. So you want contact with the entire shin and the top of the foot. And I'll see if I can do this turning sideways so you can see. Again, you want your ankle slightly forward of your knee. And this might be really intense. So just pressing into that front foot and stretching the leg. You could even do kind of a prerequisite to this, just your standing quadriceps stretch like you would in a fitness class. Just stand on one leg, catch your foot behind you, and stretch the quadriceps, the front of your leg. Okay, but this one gets that sort of lift action in the back leg. Walk that front foot forward just a little bit, pull the toes forward, and then start to release your hips from your heel. So you just start to send the hips forward. By now, you should be feeling a little intensity in that hip flexor and your quadricep, all the way from the hip to the knee. This one's good, especially if you've been working out a lot, if you've been doing lunges and squats. Even if you've been cycling or running, they're a big muscle group, primary mover, really important to stretch. So this is a really good one. Even if you just did it once a month, you would notice a difference. So as you start to advance in this, you can start to walk the hands a little bit back toward the wall, and then you can start to open the chest. Keep pushing into that front foot. So you're not just going slack and collapsing into your joints. You're still pressing into that front foot, squaring the hips forward, and then opening the heart. And this is one of those that will make your eyes tear, but it's that good pain. And as you get a little bit more advanced into this, a fun one is to reach back and try to hold your foot, hold your toes, which is another deeper advancement in your practice. So again, this one's really intense, so you can pause after the end of the second sequence and try it again and just see what happens. And then to come out of this, just take your hands to the inside of that leg and just kind of corkscrew that shin all the way down, and then you can come up. Here's the other side at a different angle, so you can see kind of what's going on. So blanket right up against the wall. The shin and the top of the foot go right up against the wall, and then you just slide it down. Pad as generously as you need. Walk the toes forward to your comfort. None of this is really comfortable, so don't feel like it's actually going to feel like warm and cozy. It's a deep stretch. So just get situated. You want your feet about hip width distance, nice and wide apart. Otherwise, you're going to be wobbly and trying to balance. So even toe heel that front foot out if you need a little bit. But you don't want the feet too much wider than hip width, because then you're stretching a different muscle group. As you get comfortable, start to let the hips release away from the heel. So if you see when I start, I'm really close, pushing into that front foot, lifting through the chest, and squeezing my butt to my heel. Again, if you want to kind of preempt this stretch with your standing quadricep stretch, that's awesome. So get as low as feels comfortable, and you can kind of play with it, kind of press and release. Keep pushing into that front foot, and then as you get comfortable, you can walk the hands back. It's a little harder if you have a chair and not blocks. Maybe you can take your hands to the tops of your knee, or you just stay with your hands at the chair. If you have that space, start to walk the hands forward and open your heart. And then again, from the side, if you want that advanced preparation, you start to connect with the back foot. And then when you're ready to release, lift that hip. Walk the hands to the inside and turn the shin all the way down to the ground. So I hope that felt challenging, but good. Okay. The last little section of stretches before you get into your mermaid. You probably didn't think this tutorial would be so long. I didn't either, but stretching is really nice. It's always good to prepare before you go into a deep stretch. Okay, so have your blanket and just have it nearby so that you can grab it. You can even fold it into a smaller variation. So whichever side is more challenging, just start on that. So I'm bringing my left foot forward, left knee forward, and then go ahead and just drop. So if you angle both the feet to 90 degrees, this is the first variation of your hip stretch, your pigeon pose. So this could be challenging enough. If you're watching this and you're not even planning on going into your mermaid variation, this can be a really nice stretch to just open the hips. You can bring blocks underneath your forearms and just hang out here. So you're bringing your chest forward toward that shin. So if you want to go deeper into the pigeon variation, you're squaring your hips. So my left knee is forward, so it's my right hip that's coming forward. That right hip goes forward, the right leg goes back. Watch what happens to that left hip. The left hip lifts off the ground. So here's where I prop. And then I can settle into that. I can open the foot out just a little bit so that the hips go square to the front and that back knee is square with the ground. The back kneecap touches the ground. And if you need to pad, I probably should have padded because this is my bad knee. But the kneecap presses to the ground, the top of the foot presses to the ground. And you want a nice line from your hip to your knee to your ankle. So notice if you're aiming toward your shin, square forward. So hip points and chest reach toward the front of your mat. You can hang out here for as long as you need. I always notice that when people go into pigeon, they just collapse right to the ground and kind of have no sense of alignment and really no concern for it. But if you're going into your mermaid, the whole point is to keep the chest lifted, right? So keep the chest nice and open, shoulders reach back, and sort of take a visual maybe of a pigeon with a proud chest, kind of walking on the ground through the city, right? So you're pressing actively through that front leg to lift your chest up. The closer the heel is to your body, the harder it is to lift. So try to challenge yourself by lifting the shin forward. So if you can get your shin parallel to your knee, awesome. It's not required, but it definitely helps to keep that lifted shape. And then you can come down. You can bring forearms to blocks or forearms to the ground. Keep that activity, elbows drawing back toward your hips. And if you want a little variation on it, take that, it's my left leg that's extended back, so my left arm goes forward, and then my right arm comes underneath my shoulder, and I'm twisting just a little bit. I'm twisting toward that bent knee that's forward. And just notice what happens to that hip. It's intense. And then come all the way back. You can pause here if you want, if you need to hold that longer. Just swing that back leg forward. And then windshield wiper the legs. Just to release that hip. And then to the other side. So have your blanket ready. I started on my right leg, so my left knee comes forward. I totally mirrored my left and right, so I don't know what I'm doing actually. So just the other side, whatever works for you. And if you want to start with that right angle through both legs, 90-90, and then just come forward toward that shin, flex the foot, make sure you have a pad underneath your ankle bone, because sometimes hardwood floors hurt. And then again, if you want, straighten out that back leg, square the hips forward. Notice how much you lift, and then pad. And for the majority of people, there's a lift. So even if you think you're not lifting, try to cushion that hip. So then that way you're not trying to hold on to balance as you stretch that hip. So find that padding, rotate the hips forward, and see if you can bring the shin forward just a little bit more. Find that zone between comfort and growth where it's mildly uncomfortable but bearable, and then lift through the chest. See if you can walk the hands forward and have a nice proud chest. So feel that zipping up of the front body and that drawing in of the back body. Back kneecap is on the ground, and one line from your hip all the way to your ankle. When you're ready, you can come forward. Again, let your eye gaze stay forward, maybe between your thumbs if your hands are forward. So resist the urge to let your head droop. Keep pressing into the forearms and drawing the shoulders back. And just see what happens with the twist, or with the stretch. If you just collapse into it and have no isometric contraction, or if you press into the floor, let the heart come forward, press your foot and your shin into the ground and lift. And then if you want that twist, so front leg, same side, front arm, and then the extended leg, extended arm, same side. Reach and twist. And then swing that leg all the way forward when you're ready. Windshield wiper the legs. So one more stretch, because the mermaid is not just the legs, it's also the arms through the chest. So laying on the ground on your belly, arms extend out. If you have lines on your floor or your carpet, you can line up so that your hand is in line with your shoulder. And then the opposite arm comes underneath your shoulder and you're rolling yourself open. That top leg can stay grounded, or you can bend the knee and anchor the foot into the ground. So you should be getting a nice stretch across the chest and the shoulder. The head can hover, or if you have space, you can press it into the earth. You can hold this as long as you want. But when you're ready to come out, roll all the way down to your belly and to the other side. So the opposite arm extends out. Make sure you don't crash into the wall. Opposite, the arm that you just stretched underneath your shoulder, press down, and then you roll open. Feet can stay together, or top leg lifts up, and you press the foot down into the earth. And just notice if one side's different than the other. It's very often the case. Roll all the way back down. And again, if you want to pause, you can just repeat those again. And then if you want one last stretch that's helpful but not required, you come up sort of into a cobra pose, or in yin yoga, it's kind of like a seal. And you take one elbow underneath your shoulder, and then you bend the opposite leg. So the same arm that the leg is bent, you catch the top of the foot, and then roll the shoulder forward. So you can either stay here, or if you have space, you can come into a half frog Ardha Bakasana. Take the heel as close to your hip, and then roll the top of your hand forward. The elbow presses back, and then that shoulder comes forward as you lift your chest. You're squeezing through your back body so that there's no pressure on your lower back at all. So your glutes are engaged, and you're pressing actively into that front elbow. And then to release, just switch, lift up through the chest, bend opposite leg, catch the foot, pull the heel in, lift up through the chest, roll the shoulder forward. If you have the space, the heel presses down toward the hip, and the fingertips turn to rotate to catch the toes. The top of the shoulder, the deltoid, is rolling forward, lifting through the chest. That shoulder rolls even with the opposite shoulder. Press down into the floor, lift through the heart, and then release. Bring both elbows underneath your shoulders and just windshield wiper the legs. And then find any stretches that feel good to release all of that. So now you're ready for your mermaid. Are you ready? So I'm going to, should I start on my good side? I'll start on my good side. I'm still going to pad because that's better for everything. So you're setting up into a pigeon pose, rolling the hips forward, opening that front shin out. So the heel comes away from the body as much as is comfortable so that you can roll that hip forward and lift through the chest. Take a peek at the back leg, hip, knee, and ankle. Make one line. And it's not the outer hip, it's actually like where your femur meets the hip joint. So one line all the way back, and then roll that back leg, roll that shoulder forward. When you're ready, hinge the leg. Remember that hamstring curl? So curl into the hamstring, lift through the chest. Reach back, catch the ankle. Maybe this is where you stay. So that front hand just anchors to a block or right outside your leg. Lift up through the chest. So here's where that half frog Ardha Bakasana comes in handy, where you pull that foot in, deeper hamstring curl, and then you kind of work your foot into the crook of the elbow. So quadricep stretch, hamstring curl, lift up through the chest. The top fingers go up, and then just see if you can find that space to release that front arm. And then if you have that shoulder space, maybe you reach back behind your head and you just touch your fingertips. Now, as I rotate forward, I'm engaging my glute to support the lift. So it's not a collapsed posture. You're actually pressing the knee into the ground, pressing the foot into your elbow, and then lifting your chest forward. And then you can hold that as long as you want. You can even kind of play with different variations. Sometimes it feels nice to come into sort of an Ardha Bakasana variation with that. You can even play with that by tucking the toes into your armpit. Make it fancy. And come out of it slow, especially if your body's not used to it. And then the more you play with that, the more you're going to open your shoulders, your upper body, and the leg, so that you might even be able to do some other variations of your pigeon pose. So to the other side, you can windshield wiper the legs just to release that. So that was my good side that I worked on. So let's see what it looks like on the other side. So find your way into your pigeon in whatever way works best for you. But that's so ultimately you have that nice square hip, shin moves out as much as is comfortable for you, and you just notice that your leg isn't out to the side or your knee isn't turning out to the side. So there's a lot of adjustment in that back leg. Square the hips forward, lift up through the chest, find that hamstring curl. And that's where you know ultimately if the knee is aiming out, because that foot is going to be toward the opposite side. So you want that foot opening toward the ceiling. And then you catch it. And this is my bad knee, so it doesn't like being on the floor. You can anchor to your block, the floor, or your knee. Just hold that foot. Keep rolling that shoulder forward. And then once you're ready, you can slither the top of the foot to your elbow. Lift the fingertips high. Engage the glute as you roll forward, and then maybe you lift that front arm. Front arm comes back, touch the fingertips, roll forward. And then as you deepen, you find that nice clasp. Push the foot into the elbow. That'll help open the chest. And you might notice a nice stretch right across the front of the chest. That's good. And then whatever version you want to play with, it's all just an exploration. It's sort of like, what would happen if I do this? What happens if I do this? So that's what it's all about. It's just playing. So another way that you can make your practice more interesting. So I hope that's helpful, and I'd love to see any pictures if you want to share. This, of course, is a safe space. You can always share pictures here. And any other questions or comments or anything, any other tutorial requests, I'm happy to take. So enjoy and have fun. Be gentle with yourself. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So just honor where you are and understand that growth takes time. So be well, have fun, and I'll see you later.